The mafia boss was surrounded at gunpoint until the single mom waitress tossed him her son's toy gun. The Lake Michigan snowstorm hit the glass of the Blue Lantern Supper Club like handfuls of white gravel. It was a horizontal blizzard, a Tuesday night execution of the weather, turning Chicago's North Shore into a monochrome blur. Outside, the club's neon sign, a stylized blue martini glass, sputtered and flickered, casting a trembling, aquatic light onto the slush pooling in the entryway. The wind howled a low baritone against the brickwork. Inside, it was supposed to be warm. Paisley Lewis, 27 years old and running on 6 hours of broken sleep, felt the cold burrowing into the restaurant anyway. She moved between the vinyl booths, her apron pocket heavy. The weight wasn't from tips. It was a cheap, luridly colored plastic toy gun. It was the only currency that had worked that afternoon to bribe her 7-year-old son, Jet, to finish his dinner before she left for her shift. He'd made her promise to keep it safe. The lump of it against her hip was just another reminder of a life pulling in two directions. She was clearing a half-eaten steak plate when the front door opened, letting in a swirl of ice and noise. They entered at the same time, 3 distinct groups, maybe 9 or 10 men in total. They did not look like patrons ready for the Blue Lantern's famous prime rib. They looked like the wind had given them physical form. They did not take off their heavy wool overcoats, dark with melted snow. They did not wait to be seated. Like shadows detaching from the wall, they fanned out. One group took the bar, flanking both ends. Another moved toward the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms. The third, the largest, simply stood in the center of the dining room, their presence sucking the warmth from the air. Paisley froze, the heavy plate in her hand. Her waitress brain, trained to map the geography of a room, saw it instantly. They weren't just entering, they were sealing. The kitchen swing doors, the emergency exit by the jukebox, the front vestibule. Every escape route was now bracketed by a silent man in a dark coat. Her eyes darted to booth 4, the deep one in the back, upholstered in cracked red leather. Casper Belandi sat there, alone. He was the eye of this sudden storm, the man they were here for, the head of the Belandi syndicate. He hadn't flinched. He wore a simple black shirt, but his wrist, resting on the table, flashed with the quiet fire of a platinum watch. He looked up from his untouched glass of water, his gaze sweeping over the new arrivals. His eyes were the color of steel, and they held no surprise, only a flat, cold assessment. He knew exactly what this was. The jazz quartet on the small stage must have felt the tension. The trumpet player, mid-solo, faltered. His note died in a painful, aborted squawk. As if that were the signal, the stage lights snapped off. The only illumination now was the dying neon from outside and the few emergency bulbs, casting the room in a sickly, pressurized twilight. The leader of the center group, a man with a face like cured leather, stepped forward. His hand emerged from beneath his coat, holding a heavy, matte black firearm. It looked alien and obscene in the cozy supper club. He aimed it steadily at booth 4. His voice was a low whisper that somehow carried over the howl of the wind. "Books closed tonight. Casper." Paisley's breath hitched. Time slowed, stretching thin. The other men were raising their own weapons. She saw the multiple black bores all centering on the man in the booth. But in that fractional second, as the Viscari leader spoke, 2 of the gunmen near the bar shifted their aim slightly, moving to cover the 2 men who were rising from the booth behind Casper's bodyguards she hadn't even registered. It was a tiny shift, a momentary transfer of focus, but Paisley saw it. Her hand, already in her apron, closed around the cheap plastic. It was an automatic reflex, the same instinct that made her grab Jet's arm before he stepped into the street. It was not a thought. It was an action. She was a decent pitcher. She'd spent summers playing softball in Humboldt Park. With a sharp exhale, she threw the toy gun. It was a fastball, low and flat, cutting through the smoky air. It flew straight over the center table and landed with a plastic clatter right on Casper Belandi's plate. The gunman flinched, instinct, honed by years of violence, screamed at them new variable. A weapon from an unexpected quarter. Their eyes darted to the object, then to Paisley, for one fatal, confused heartbeat. Casper did not hesitate. He didn't look at the toy. His hand snatched it from the plate. His other hand swept underneath it, mimicking the metallic shk-shk of racking a slide on a semi-automatic. He raised it, two-handed, aiming not at the leader, but at the man closest to the kitchen door. He didn't shout. He just became the threat. The illusion was perfect. It was just enough. The hesitation of the Vascari crew was all Casper's men needed. The two bodyguards didn't draw guns. They erupted. One pulled a high-lumen tactical flashlight from his jacket, blasting the leader's face with a beam of blinding white light, making him roar in pained surprise. The other bodyguard didn't attack. He grabbed the heavy oak dining table nearest him and flipped it onto its side, creating a solid wall of cover. "Trap!" one of the gunmen yelled, thinking they'd been spotted, that this was a setup. The perfect formation broke. The Vascari, assassins, not soldiers, were built for clean executions, not chaotic firefights against an enemy they couldn't see. Blinded by the light and panicked by the sudden, armed resistance, they scrambled for the exit. They shoved past each other, a disorderly mob now, tripping into the vestibule and vanishing into the white chaos of the storm. Silence crashed back into the room, heavier this time, broken only by a woman sobbing in a booth and the distant wail of a new siren. Paisley stood locked in place, her arm still tingling from the throw. She was shaking so hard she thought her knees might buckle. The snow swirled in through the open door, coating the carpet. Casper Belandi slowly lowered the toy gun, placing it gently on the table. He rose from the booth and walked toward her, moving through the wreckage of flipped chairs. His bodyguards were already securing the door, speaking in low tones into their phones. He stopped directly in front of her. He was taller up close, and the steel in his eyes was fixed on hers. He smelled faintly of expensive wool and cold air. He didn't thank her. He leaned in, his voice just as low and chilling as the Vascari leaders, but laced with something else, something like iron. "You just put me in your debt," he murmured, the sound barely audible over her own frantic pulse. "Or I put you in mine." He held her gaze. "Your choice." The morning television was screaming. Not her name, but a title, Toy Gun Waitress. Paisley squinted at the blurry, 10-second clip playing on the Channel 5 morning news, looped endlessly. It showed the chaotic interior of the Blue Lantern, the flash of a tactical light, and then, captured by some terrified customer's phone, her own face. She was pale, stunned, her arm still half extended from the throw. "Waitress saves reputed mob boss with child's toy," the chyron blared. Her phone, an old model with a spiderweb crack across the screen, vibrated violently on the Formica countertop of her studio apartment. It had not stopped buzzing since 6 a.m. This kind of exposure was a different kind of threat. It was toxic. It jeopardized her other job, the one that really mattered, the 6 a.m. shift at Harbor Fry that paid for groceries and bus fare. The Blue Lantern, her night job, was just for the debt. The debt was a physical presence in the small apartment. It lived in a shoebox under her bed, a stack of beige envelopes detailing the final, agonizing costs of her mother's fight with bone cancer. Thousands of dollars that felt as insurmountable as the lake itself, as if summoned by the thought. She saw a crisp white envelope that had been taped to her door when she got home. Her landlord. Seeing the Edgewater neighborhood gentrify block by block, he was hiking the rent 20%, effective the 1st of next month. She turned away from the television, the anchor's excited voice grating on her nerves. Her son, Jet, 7 years old and beautifully oblivious, sat at their small kitchen table. He was drawing on the back of a utility bill. His tongue stuck out in concentration. He was meticulously coloring a new superhero, one with a green cape and, in his hand, a bright red water pistol. The phone buzzed. She picked it up. a fast-talking reporter from a downtown tabloid, offering 3 figures for an exclusive. She hung up. It buzzed again. A giggling teenager asking if her aim was good. Click. It buzzed a 3rd time. The voice was different. A woman. Her tone low, calm, and professional. Miss Lewis, my name is Agent Shaw. I'm with the Midwest Organized Crime Bureau. We would like to schedule a time to discuss options regarding your recent interaction. We can offer protection. Paisley's blood went cold. Midwest Organized Crime Bureau. It sounded official. Heavy, federal. I have to take my son to school, she stammered and hung up, her hand shaking. Protection. The word hung in the air, tasting like a trap. Later, walking back from Northview Elementary, the gray Chicago sky pressing down, she stopped at her bicycle. It was chained to a street sign. Tucked into the plastic wire basket on the handlebars was something that wasn't hers. It was a photograph, a 4x6 glossy print, her stomach twisted into a knot. It was her and Jet, taken just minutes ago. They were standing outside the school's chain-link fence, Jet looking up at her, his backpack oversized. On the bottom, scrawled in messy black marker, was a single sentence, "Toys eventually run out of batteries." She ran the rest of the way home, her breath ragged, took the stairs 2 at a time, and slammed the deadbolt on her apartment door. There was something else waiting. Propped against her door was an opulent, almost funereal arrangement of deep blue irises. The vase was heavy and black. Tucked inside the blooms was a single, heavy-stock business card. It read, simply Belandi Maritime Holdings. Nothing else. She turned it over. A phone number was handwritten on the back in precise, strong ink. Beneath the number, embossed so lightly she almost missed it, was a small, clean anchor. No note, no thank you. Just a number and a symbol. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled for it. The caller ID read Mike, Blue Lantern. Mike, Paisley. Her manager's voice was strained, apologetic. Listen, I am so sorry. The owners, they can't have this. They can't have this kind of heat, the Viscari. They know your face. We have to let you go, to avoid trouble. Avoid trouble, Paisley repeated, her voice flat. You're a good kid, Paisley, but you're radioactive right now. The check's in the mail. The line went dead. She slid down the wall, the business card in one hand, her phone in the other, the rent hike, the hospital debt, and now, half her income, the debt-paying half, was gone. She was on the brink. That evening, Jet, sensing the quiet panic radiating from her, looked up from his homework. "Mommy," he asked, his voice small, "did I mess things up because of my gun?" The question broke something in her. She pulled him into a fierce hug, burying her face in his hair, fighting the sudden, sharp sting in her eyes. "No, baby," she whispered, her voice thick. "No, you saved the day. You're my hero. Remember?" The next day, she took the Red Line train to her shift at Harbor Fry, her stomach churning. She felt watched, every nerve ending exposed. She caught the eye of a nondescript man in a Cubs hat sitting by the doors. He was reading a paper, but his eyes were not on the print. He was watching her reflection in the dark glass of the train window. He was tracking her. A new instinct, cold and sharp, was being born in her gut, a survival reflex she never knew she had. When she got home, Agent Shaw from the MOCB called again. This time, Paisley listened. "The people who came after Belandi are the Viscari family," the agent said, her voice clipped. "All business. And now they know your face. You and your son are in direct danger. We can move you. We have a secure residential facility, Station Indigo. We'll take care of everything. In return, we just need your full cooperation. Everything you saw, everything Casper Belandi said to you." Station Indigo. It sounded like a prison. They weren't offering to protect her. They were offering to use her as bait. That night, long after Jet's soft breathing filled the studio, Paisley sat in the dark. The only light came from the passing headlights on Sheridan Road, sweeping across the blue irises. She looked at the flower, at the thick business card, and at the shoebox full of her mother's debt. She was trapped. The Vescari wanted her silent. The feds wanted her to talk. Her landlord wanted her gone. Both choices, the MOCB and doing nothing, were passive. They were things happening to her. Casper Belandi's voice echoed in her memory. Your choice. Her fingers, steady now, picked up the phone. She dialed the number from the back of the card. It rang only once. Yes. A low voice. No introduction. This is Paisley Lewis, she said, her own voice surprising her with its strength. I don't want a favor. I don't want your debt. There was a beat of silence. Then what do you want? I want leverage, she said, looking at the picture of her son by the phone. I'm not running and I'm not hiding. She could almost hear the slight shift in his posture, the spark of metallic interest. All right, Casper Belandi replied. Then we meet. Your terms. You choose the place. She chose the Ravensfoot Rink at 10 p.m. It was public, exposed, and lit by massive floodlights that bleached the ice. There was no cover, nowhere for his men to hide. It was a statement. She would not be intimidated in another dark room. The wind was brutal, slicing across the empty rink, making the chain-link fence hum. She stood in her thin coat, her hands shoved deep in her pockets, her breath pluming. She was 10 minutes early. He was exactly on time. Casper Belandi walked onto the ice not from the rental shed, but through a clipped gate from the service alley. He wore no overcoat, just a heavy, dark gray turtleneck sweater, dark trousers, and leather shoes that looked dangerously smooth for this surface. He was bare-handed, his watch a simple dark band on his wrist. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, the wind cutting at his face and hair, but he seemed entirely unaffected by it. He did not slip. He stopped 10 feet from her, the floodlights carving shadows under his cheekbones. This is open, he observed, his voice calm and carrying easily on the cold air. I like the light, Paisley said, her voice tight. I want to see the terms clearly. Then speak them. She took a breath, the air burning her lungs. First, my son. Jet is out. He's not a name you say, not a picture you look at, not a person your world ever touches. You guarantee that? He nodded once. Agreed. Second, no blood near my door. I don't mean just my apartment, I mean my life. No Vescari. No one comes near me or my son. I will not have shootouts at the grocery store or men in cars outside his school. That was a Vescari action. Not mine, he said. I don't care, she shot back. You're the weather, they're the storm. You fix the forecast. I'll provide insulation, he said. Next. Third, I keep the right to pull the plug. Anytime if I feel that line is crossed, if I feel you've lied, I walk, and you let me walk. No repercussions, no debt. He watched her for a long moment, his steel-colored eyes seeming to catalog the set of her jaw. You're not here to be my guest, Miss Lewis. You're here for a job. A job. I have an insider, he said, moving a step closer. His lack of a coat was its own form of intimidation. It made him seem impervious. Someone who gave my schedule to Arno Vescari. Someone who knew I'd be at the Blue Lantern. And when? You're observant. You saw the exits they covered. You saw the shift in their aim. I need those eyes. He named the position. You'll work the night shift, hostess, at the Cobalt Room, my club. Paisley processed this. A hostess, a listener, a pair of eyes at the center of his operation. In return, he continued, preempting her next question, the hospital debt that's keeping you in that studio is paid, in full, as of an hour ago. Paisley felt her knees almost buckle. That shoebox, empty. You and your son will be moved to a secure apartment, a non-listed property in Lincoln Park, doorman, cameras, solid walls, and I will provide a driver for your son. Absolutely not, she snapped. She's a woman, Casper said, Vlay, his voice cutting off the argument. Ex-military police, armored vehicles division. She'll be running a private shuttle service for executive families in the area. Your son will be one of 3 children she picks up. It's clean, it's cover. He will be safer with her than he is with you right now. The cold, practical brutality of that statement hit her. He was right. All right, Paisley said, her mind racing. This was the leverage. I agree to the job, but I want it on paper. A flicker of something not quite a smile, but a sharp, dry amusement touched his eyes. On paper. You heard me. A contract, drawn up by a third-party lawyer, not one of yours. It will state my duties, my pay, and your 3 guarantees: the debt, the housing, and the absolute protection of my son. And it will state my right to terminate. I want a legal document. Mr. Belandi, I'm not taking a handshake deal from the head of the harbor. He was impressed. She could see it. A waitress demanding a legally binding contract from a man whose entire world operated outside the law. You'll get your paper, he said. The world exploded in a sharp crack that was instantly snatched by the wind. It was not a car backfiring. It was high velocity. Casper didn't look. He moved. In one fluid motion, he lunged, grabbing the front of her coat with one hand. He pulled her forward and down, using her own momentum against her. Her feet slid out from under her on the ice, and they went down together in a controlled slide, his body half shielding hers. His mouth clamped over her ear. It was not a kiss. It was a tactical violation, hot and shocking against her frozen skin, blocking the sound. Sniper, he breathed, his voice a vibration directly in her skull. Rooftop, across the street, stay down. A second crack, this time. She heard the hiss of the bullet passing over them. It was so close it felt like a hot insect. A single strand of her hair, whipped free from her ponytail, was cut clean. Then, chaos. Sirens, already close, now converged. Blue and red lights flooded the park. Tires screeched on the icy street. They're late, Casper grunted, pushing himself up and pulling her to her feet in one motion. A white van and 2 black sedans slammed to a halt. Men in windbreakers marked MOCB spilled out, weapons drawn, shouting. Midwest organized crime, hands in the air, Belandi. Stay where you are. A woman with a clipboard and a camera was right behind them, Agent Shaw. Casper didn't even look at them. He kept his grip on Paisley's arm, steering her toward the service alley he had emerged from. A section of the fence was temporary construction siding. Mr. Belandi, Shaw yelled, scrambling onto the ice and almost falling. He paused at the gap in the fence. He looked at Paisley. The calculating coldness was gone, replaced by a residual, focused adrenaline. He pulled his left hand from his pocket. It was gloved. He stripped the black leather glove off and pressed it into her bare hand. It was incredibly warm. The leather molded to his grip. Go home, Miss Lewis. My lawyer will call you in the morning about the contract. He vanished through the construction exit just as the MOCB agents reached center ice, their cameras flashing uselessly at the empty space. Paisley stood alone, the flashing lights painting her face red and blue. She was shaking, but not from fear. From the transfer of power, she had stepped off the curb and into the path of a speeding train. But she was no longer just a spectator. She had her hand on the brake. She walked home, the warm glove clutched in her fist. When she got to her apartment, she fumbled for her keys, her phone vibrating in her pocket. It was a text from a blocked number. It was just an image, a photograph of Jet's plastic toy gun, but it had been painted. It was now a slick, matte black, mimicking the Vescari leader's weapon. Beneath the image, 2 letters, A.V. The new apartment was clean, high-windowed, and impersonal, located in a Lincoln Park high-rise that smelled of lemon polish and old money. Her son, Jet, was picked up and dropped off by a woman named Hess, a former military police officer whose quiet competence was more reassuring than any bodyguard. The contract had been signed, witnessed by a baffled legal aid lawyer who kept rereading the clauses. The mountain of hospital debt had simply evaporated, paid by an anonymous wire. Paisley Lewis, North Shore waitress, was gone. In her place was Miss Lewis, the new evening hostess for the Cobalt Room. The club was nothing like the Blue Lantern. It was a subterranean vault of luxury, buried in the foundations of a River North skyscraper. The walls were covered in deep, indigo velvet that seemed to absorb both light and sound. The ceiling was a complex mosaic of smoked mirrors, fracturing the clientele into abstract, Wealthy Reflections, the jazz trio, the city's best, played behind a translucent mesh curtain, their music a pulsing, ambient heartbeat rather than a performance. Paisley, dressed in a severe, elegant black dress that was the club's uniform, stood at a polished mahogany podium. Her stated job was to manage the flow of Chicago's elite. Her real job, Casper's job, was to be his eyes and ears. She learned the room's rhythm, which came in 3 distinct waves. The first, from 7 to 9, was the Belandi Maritime Brass, dock foremen, ship captains, and logistics managers. They drank whiskey and talked loudly about tonnage, weather patterns, and union disputes. The second wave, from 9 until 11, was the port contractors and city officials, men in expensive, conservative suits who drank $1,000 bottles of wine. They never spoke of the harbor. They discussed politics, real estate, and which steakhouse served the best dry-aged ribeye. The third wave, arriving after 11, was the true syndicate, the late diners. They were quiet, moved with purpose, and were always seated in the deep, soundproofed booths at the back. Paisley watched, she listened, and she remembered. She memorized the patterns, the contractor who always ordered a Macallan 18 but only drank half of it, the politician who always arrived alone but left with a maritime lobbyist. On her third night, she saw the crack. Priska Vale, Casper's chief accountant, a woman with iron gray hair and a gaze like a ledger, was leaving. She paused by the service station to speak to a new barback, a young man Paisley had noted for his anxious energy. Vale smiled, a rare event, and touched his arm. As she did, her gloved hand passed a thick white envelope to his. It was seamless, a sleight of hand perfected by practice. An hour later, Paisley approached the barback as he polished glasses. "Mr. Belandi is running late tonight," she said casually, straightening a stack of napkins. "He wanted me to pass on his thanks for everyone's hard work." The barback's hand jumped, clattering a glass against the rack. A deep, terrified flush crept up his neck. His pulse was visibly hammering just beneath his skin. He was terrified of the name. Paisley filed the reaction. The following week, she was standing near the DJ booth, which handled the music between jazz sets. The DJ, a man with a bored expression, was speaking low into his headset, presumably to the light booth. "The anchor is broken," he whispered, his voice just barely audible. "I repeat, the broken anchor. Window is 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., Pier 12. Paisley went rigid. The broken anchor. The symbol of Belandi Maritime. She moved back to her podium, her mind racing. A shipping schedule? A window of time. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to the secure number Casper had given her. "DJ is selling timetables. Code is broken anchor. Pier 12, 4 a.m. to 5 a.m. The reply was instant. Seen. She looked up from the screen, her heart suddenly cold, and found him standing there. Arno Viscari. He wasn't flanked by men in overcoats. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored blue suit, smiling as if he were a tourist. He was alone, which was more terrifying than if he had brought an army. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. "A table for one. Please." Paisley's professional mask snapped into place. "Do you have a reservation, sir?" "Oh, I think not," he said, his dark eyes amused, enjoying her forced composure. "But I'm sure you can accommodate me. I came for the music." She seated him at a small exposed table in the center of the room. He was making a statement. "I can sit in the heart of your fortress, and you can do nothing." He ordered a single espresso and sat for an hour, just watching. When the jazz trio returned, Arno signaled the piano player. He made a request. The musician nodded, looking uneasy. The singer stepped up to the microphone, and a slow, haunting melody filled the room, softly, as in a morning sunrise. Paisley knew the song. It was a warning, a threat whispered in velvet. 2 hours later, long after Arno had paid his bill in cash and vanished, Casper's text came. Rooftop. The service roof was 16 floors up. The wind was a physical force, roaring over the edge, carrying the metallic smell of the city. Casper stood near the ledge, his back to her, looking out at the glittering ribbon of the Chicago River. He wore his overcoat, the collar turned up. "The DJ is gone," he said, his voice flat, not turning. "The pier is secure. Arno Viscari was here," Paisley stated, her hands deep in her pockets. "I know." He finally turned. The ambient light of the city carved his face from shadow. "He wanted me to know. He wanted you to know." He looked down at the harbor lights, a distant constellation. "I'm trying to legitimize all of this," he said, his voice quieter, almost swallowed by the wind. "Bellandi, freight works, logistics, container shipping, all of it clean. I want to build something that lasts." He paused, the silence stretching. "I want to get it all clean," he said, finally looking at her, "before you hate me." The vulnerability in the admission was a shock. It was a confession, stark and cold as the air around them. She closed the distance between them, the wind whipping her hair across her face. "I don't hate you, Casper," she said, her voice sharp. "I hate this. The threats, the shadows. I hate half measures. You want to be clean, then be clean." She met his gaze. "Either stop the blood or stay away from my family." They stood less than a foot apart, caught in the high, cold wind. The tension was a wire pulled taut. He looked at her, his steel eyes tracing her features, seeing the exhaustion and the fear, but also the defiance. She saw his hand clench, saw the desire to reach, to close that last gap, but he didn't. He respected her line. He waited, giving her the power. Paisley made the choice. She lifted her hand, her fingers numb with cold, and laid her palm against the side of his neck. Her thumb pressed against the artery just below his jaw, under her skin. She felt it, the sudden, frantic, rapid thump of his pulse. It was a wild, terrified bird, a betrayal of the calm exterior. He closed his eyes, leaning almost imperceptibly into her touch. A high-pitched, electronic whine sliced through the roar of the wind. Casper's eyes snapped open. His hand grabbed her waist, pulling her back from the ledge as they both scanned the sky. A small, four-rotor drone, its red recording light blinking, hovered 20 feet above them. It hung there for a moment, a mechanical insect, then dipped. A thin black line descended. It dropped a small object that clattered onto the gravel roof. The drone then shot straight up, vanishing into the night. Casper, his body still shielding Paisley's, looked down. It was a standard USB memory card. Attached to it by a small zip tie was a red plastic charm, a sneaker, the exact one she had bought for Jet's backpack 2 weeks ago. Casper retrieved it. He walked to a locked service panel on the wall, opened it, and pulled out a ruggedized laptop, a private stash. He plugged in the drive. The screen illuminated. There was no sound, just shaky video. It was Jet, leaving Northview Elementary that afternoon. Hess, the driver, was walking beside him. The camera zoomed in, impossibly tight on Jet's laughing, 7-year-old face. The Lincoln Park apartment was no longer secure. The drone video was a declaration that Arno Viscari could touch them anywhere. Within an hour, Casper had Jet and Hess, the unflappable ex-MP driver, relocated. The new apartment was called the Harbor Light. It was a stark, modern penthouse in a building that loomed over the commercial shipping lanes, a property Casper owned through 3 layers of shell corporations. The windows, he explained in a flat, cold voice, were 3-inch thick ballistic glass, rated to stop a high-caliber rifle round. Paisley, however, did not go with them. "I stay at the Cobalt Room," she insisted, the words tasting like ash. "The moment I disappear, I'm no longer the bait. He loses his leverage on you, and he'll get desperate. He'll go for the real target. He'll go for Jet." Casper's jaw tightened. He hated the logic, but he could not refute it. She would remain the visible, vulnerable target. The pressure wasn't just from the Viscari. Agent Tilda Shaw from the MOCB had become a shadow, cornering Paisley during her morning shift at the Harbor Fry, her last anchor to her old, normal life. Shaw got into her car, the interior smelling of stale coffee and bureaucratic certainty. "You need to stop playing house with him, Miss Lewis," Shaw said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Casper Bellandi is not a misunderstood businessman. He's a criminal. The Vescari are just the other side of the same dirty coin, and you're standing in the middle. She slid a small, black plastic square across the dashboard, a digital recorder, a wire. "You wear this," Shaw commanded. "You get him talking about the Vescari. You get him talking about the protection rackets on the docks. We get Belandi. We get all of them. We put you and your son in witness protection. New names, a new city, a clean start, a real one." She leaned in. "Think about your boy, Paisley. Do you want him growing up in this?" Paisley looked at the device. Station Indigo. A different kind of cage. "I'll think about it." She lied and got out of the car. That night, Casper found her at the Cobalt room before the first guests arrived. He looked tired, the skin under his eyes dark. He led her to his private office, a soundproof room behind the wine cellar. "She cornered you today," he stated. It was not a question. "She wants me to wear a wire." He nodded, scrubbing a hand over his face. This isn't the life I was trying to build." He paced to the window, which looked out onto a lightless, narrow air shaft. "My father, my grandfather. They ran the docks. They called it protection. It was extortion, plain and simple, taking a cut from every crate that came in, every ship that moored." He turned back to her, his steel eyes burning with a frustrated, trapped intensity she had never seen. "I'm trying to cut that part out. Belandi Freight Works. That's my endgame. Clean logistics, container shipping, moving cargo, not muscle. Every dollar I make clean. I used to buy out the old contracts, to shut down the old rackets." He shook his head. "It's slow. It's like turning a freighter in a canal. But I'm close." He stopped, realizing how much he had revealed. Arno knows this. He doesn't want to build. He just wants to take... He wants the docks as they were. And you... He looked at her, his voice dropping. "You're the leverage he thinks will make me break." Paisley listened, and for the first time, she saw the path through the storm. It wasn't just about survival. It was about an actual, clean ending. She saw the man who wanted to be free of the blood. The text came 3 nights later, at 2 a.m, an unknown number, a photo of Jet's sneakers, kicked off by a doorway. The message: "Jet fell. Hess isn't answering. He's asking for you, Pier 41. Come alone." Pure, white-hot panic vaporized every rational thought. It was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She didn't call Casper. She didn't call the police. She ran. She grabbed a cab, her voice shaking as she gave the address. Pier 41, the industrial yard. She called Hess's phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called the Harbor Lights landline. No answer. The pier was a dark, metallic canyon, stacked high with rusting containers. The air smelled of diesel fuel and dead fish. "Jet!" she screamed, her voice cracking, lost in the wind. A figure stepped out from the shadows. Not Jet. Arno Vescari. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a video camera, its red recording light blinking. "He's not here. Paisley," Arno said, his voice oily with false sympathy. He raised the camera, centering her in the frame. "But you are. And soon, Casper will be." She saw it instantly. The setup. "You're trying to frame him. I'm trying to document a tragedy." Arno smiled, panning the camera around the dark, isolated pier. A mob boss, so consumed with jealousy over his waitress that he murders his rival in cold blood. The MOCB will love it. The press will devour it. He'll be ruined. A black sedan skidded to a halt at the pier entrance. Casper got out, alone. "Arno," he yelled, his voice echoing off the steel walls. He didn't look at Paisley. He scanned the tops of the containers. "Right here. Casper," Arno shouted, aiming the camera. "Come say hello." A shot rang out from above, a Vescari gunman. Casper dove behind a massive forklift. Paisley saw his hands. They were empty. He hadn't brought a gun. He was trapped. Arno's men were moving to flank him. Casper, seeing his path blocked, did the last thing they expected. He sprinted away from the exit, leaping into the control cab of the pier's main loading crane, its engine idling. "What is he doing?" Arno muttered, keeping the camera rolling. The massive engine roared. With a groan of tortured metal, the huge magnetic lifting arm swung through the air. It didn't swing toward Arno. It swung toward the pier entrance. It locked onto a 40-foot blue container and, in one terrifyingly smooth motion, lifted it and deposited it sideways, completely blocking the only way out. Arno's escape route was gone. "He's trapped us!" one of Arno's men yelled, panicking. That was Paisley's cue. Her eyes landed on a yellow bullhorn resting on a nearby crate. She grabbed it. She didn't aim it at Arno. She aimed it at the sky, mimicking a siren, loud and crude. Wee-woo, wee-woo. Then she flipped the switch. "This is MOC Task Force. We have you surrounded. Throw down your weapons. You have 10 seconds, 9-8. The bluff was perfect. Arno, believing Casper's tip had been a double cross to lure both him and the feds, cursed violently. He looked at the blocked exit, at the dark water, and at the flashing lights that did seem to be approaching in the far distance. He and his men scrambled, dropping the camera and climbing the high chain-link fence at the side of the pier, vanishing into the industrial darkness. They drove back to the harbor light in absolute silence. When the heavy, reinforced door of the penthouse clicked shut, Casper walked to the wall of ballistic glass. He stared at the dark, churning water, his hands braced on the sill. Paisley saw that his hands, the hands that had just controlled a 50-ton crane, were shaking. It was not a tremor. It was a deep, uncontrollable tremble that vibrated up his arms. "They took my brother," he said, his voice rough, unrecognizable. "When I was 15, he was 12. The Vescari family, not Arno, his uncle. It was a message to my father." He swallowed, his back still to her. "They took him on a boat. They just left him in the lake. We found him 3 days later." He turned, his eyes raw, the steel facade shattered. "When I got that text, that Arno had you, that he might have Jet, I saw him. I saw my brother. He was afraid. Not of dying, he was afraid of losing." Paisley walked to him, the space between them charged with the night's adrenaline. The push and pull was over. This was the man, stripped of the syndicate. She reached up, her own hands trembling, and cupped his face. She initiated the kiss. It was not soft. It was desperate and immediate, a confirmation of life. It tasted of the cold night, of salt air and the metallic tang of fear. It was a kiss of grounding, a blunt refusal to let the past win. His hands came up, not to grab her, but to rest on the small of her back. They were slow, hesitant, his thumbs brushing the fabric of her coat. He was asking permission. When he pulled back just an inch, his eyes were dark with a question he would not voice. They stood there, the kiss broken, but the connection holding, the tension of the night shifting into something warmer, heavier. She rested her forehead against his. "When all the doors are locked," she whispered, her voice husky. "When Jet is safe, when Arno is gone, when it's all done." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Then I'll open my door." A small, pained smile touched Casper's mouth. It was the first real one she had ever seen. "I can wait," he said, his voice still rough. "As long as you're sure." The pivot came without warning. 2 nights later, the Cobalt Room was in full swing, the jazz trio hitting a smooth rhythm. When the doors burst open, it wasn't a raid, it was an invasion. Agent Tilda Shaw, flanked by 24 MOCB agents in tactical gear, stormed the podium. "Operation Sapphire Net," she announced, her voice booming over the startled music. "This establishment is being seized." The chaos was immediate. Patrons in couture were shoved aside. Agents swarmed the back office, the wine cellar, and Casper's private room. Paisley was detained, her hands zip-tied behind her back, forced to watch as they tore the club apart. Casper was not present. He was at a late meeting at the Freight Works office. But the true damage was revealed an hour later. Priska Vale, the iron-haired accountant, had vanished, and the ledgers seized from the main safe were wrong. They were a separate set of books, ones Paisley had never seen. They were cartoonishly incriminating, detailing blatant money laundering schemes tied directly to Belandi Maritime. They were a plant, Priska, the insider, had set Casper up. The next morning, the second blow landed. A local news station exclusively obtained a leaked surveillance video. It was grainy, dark, and showed Casper on a loading dock, handing a heavy aluminum briefcase to a man in shadow. The news identified the man as a high-ranking Port Authority official. Paisley watched it on the small television in the Harbor Light apartment, her stomach clenching. It looked damning, but she watched it again and again, the angle. The camera was positioned low, looking up, making both men look sinister. But where was it filmed from? She knew that dock. There was no place to mount a camera that low unless someone was holding it. It was cropped. It wasn't surveillance, it was a performance, filmed by Arno, designed to look like a secret recording. Arno didn't stop there. He launched his own media assault. The photos from the drone, the ones of Jet outside his school, were anonymously leaked to a dozen blogs and tabloids. The narrative was brutal. Mob boss Casper Belandi uses single mother, 7-year-old boy as human shields. The public, already primed by the fake ledgers and the cropped video, was furious. Casper was no longer a shadowy figure. He was a monster. Casper watched the reports in the apartment, his face a mask of cold fury. The walls were closing in. He was being framed by Arno and hunted by the MOCB. "They've built a perfect cage," he said, his voice quiet. He went to his desk. "If I fight Arno in the old way, I confirm everything they're saying. If I do nothing, he wins, Shaw wins." He began pulling files. Belandi Freight Works, stamped on each. "So I give them something real." "What are you doing?" Paisley asked, her heart sinking. "I'm giving Shaw a piece of my legitimate operation," he said, slotting files into a briefcase. "Shipping manifests, incorporation papers, proof of my efforts to dissolve the old dock rackets. I'm going to cooperate, to prove the legitimization. It's the only move I have left." "They'll arrest you, Casper. They'll call this a desperate ploy." "They might." He agreed, his eyes meeting hers. "It's a risk, but it's the only one that doesn't involve a gun." He left to meet his lawyers, planning to turn over the files the next day. But Paisley felt a piece of the puzzle grinding in her gut. Priska Vale, the disappearing accountant who just happened to leave the perfect evidence for Shaw. She left Hess with Jet and took a cab to Priska's last known address, a quiet street in Wicker Park. She sat in a coffee shop across the street for 3 hours, numb and exhausted, running on pure, acidic suspicion. At 4 p.m., she saw her, Priska, wearing a blonde wig and sunglasses, walked out of a different building and got into a parked sedan. Paisley followed in her cab, her pulse hammering. The sedan drove to a desolate, multi-story parking garage near O'Hare. Priska went to the roof level. Paisley took the stairs, her breath clouding in the cold concrete air. She peered over the barrier. Priska was standing next to a dark, official-looking car. Agent Tilda Shaw was leaning against the driver's door. Paisley's blood turned to ice. "You're sure this is everything?" Shaw's voice was sharp, cutting through the wind. "It's enough," Priska said, handing over a small memory card. "The ledgers I left will tie him up. This card," she tapped it, "has the access codes to his private accounts. It's enough to freeze his assets. You get what you want." "And my end?" Priska asked. "The Vascari organization is now the primary target," Shaw said, her voice dripping with cold pragmatism. "Belandi is the head of the snake. We cut it off. The tail Arno, the Vascari crew. They'll just be disorganized street trash. We can clean them up later. We swap the head. We cut the tail. You get your immunity." Shaw, Priska, and Arno. They were all working together. It was never about justice. It was a power grab, using her and Casper as the pawns. When Paisley returned to the Harbor Light, she found Hess white-knuckled, her face pale. "What happened?" Paisley demanded. "A new school counselor asked to speak with Jet," Hess said, her voice shaking with repressed rage. "A woman. She said it was about the stress he must be under. I went with him. She started asking questions about Mr. Belandi, about who visits the apartment, about if Mommy seemed scared." Hess's eyes were hard. "I ended the interview. I pulled the fire alarm to get him out of the room. It wasn't a counselor. Paisley. Her credentials were fake. She was one of them. No harm had been done. No one had touched him. But the line was crossed. The final, absolute line. They had come for her son. That night, she waited for Casper. When he returned, she didn't let him speak. She was a plant, Paisley said, her voice shaking with a cold, clear rage. Shaw, she's working with Priska. They're setting you up to hand you to the Vescari. Paisley. And they went to Jet's school, she said, her voice breaking. A fake counselor. They tried to question him. The color drained from Casper's face. The files he was holding slipped from his hand. No more, Paisley said, stepping toward him. No more waiting, no more risks, no more half measures. You wanted to be clean. This is your chance. She stood before him, the mother replacing the hostess. You have a choice. Right now. You burn them all. Not just Arno, the corrupt officials he works with, the ones who let him do this. You expose everyone. Or I take my son. I walk into the MOCB headquarters tomorrow, and I testify against all of you. I will tell them about the Blue Lantern, the Cobalt Room, the pier, everything. I will burn it all down myself to keep my son safe. Choose. Casper looked at her, seeing the absolute, unbreakable finality in her eyes. This was the end of the line. He nodded slowly. He walked to a high-security safe hidden behind a framed nautical chart. He entered a complex code. You're right, he said, the tumblers clicking. It's time to end it. The safe opened, revealing a single, black, leather-bound book. This is Ledger Omega, he said, his voice grim. My father's insurance policy. It's not just my records. It's theirs. He opened it. Inside, pages of handwritten transactions. It's the entire chain of Vescari payments, decades of them, all leading to one place, the private campaign fund of Alderman Thomas Kelm. He looked up at her, his eyes clear and decided. He's the one who's been protecting Arno. He's the one Shaw is really working for. How do we use it? We don't give it to Shaw, he said. We give it to everyone. But we need a copy, and we need a place to do it. He thought for a moment. Tomorrow night, Blue Junction Freight Yard. It's isolated. It's controllable. We'll make the transfer there. The hours before they were set to leave for Blue Junction felt unnaturally still. The Harbor Light apartment was a fortress of quiet. 16 stories above the churning, invisible lake, the ballistic glass, built to stop bullets, also silenced the world, leaving only the sound of the filtered air. First, there was Jet. Paisley tucked him into his new bed, the sheets crisp and unfamiliar. His eyes were heavy, but he fought sleep, sensing the thrum of adult tension in the air. Are you going to work, Mommy? He asked, his voice small. Sort of, she said, smoothing his hair. She pulled his small quilt up to his chin. It's a very important meeting. She began the story they both knew, the one her own mother had told her. Once, there was a little boat, she murmured, her voice soft, and a big, big storm came. The waves were as tall as buildings, and the wind tried to push the boat onto the rocks. Was the boat scared? Jet whispered. The boat was terrified, Paisley said, her eyes meeting his. But it had a navigator, and the navigator knew the way. She kept her hand on the wheel and her eyes on a tiny, faraway star, and she whispered to the boat, I will not let you break. I will be your pilot. And she steered it right through the dark until the morning came and the water was calm. You're the navigator, Jet mumbled, his eyelids finally drooping. I am, baby. She kissed his forehead. I'll always be your navigator. Now sleep. She watched him for a long moment, the rise and fall of his chest, before quietly closing his bedroom door. Casper was waiting in the living area. He wasn't packing. He wasn't on the phone. He was just standing by the massive window, looking down at the dark grid of the city. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. He turned as she approached. They just looked at each other. The time for questions was over. The time for doubt had passed. They had made their choice, individually and now, together. There was nothing left to say that wasn't already understood. The air between them was heavy, not with fear, but with a terrible, binding clarity. She walked to him, stopping just inches away. She could feel the heat radiating from him. Slowly. She lifted her hand, not to his chest, but to his face. Her fingers, calloused from years of carrying hot plates, traced the thin, white line of the scar on his jaw. It was a remnant of his old life, a map of the violence he claimed to be leaving. She felt the muscle clench beneath her touch. He did not move. He did not take what she was offering. He asked. His voice was a low rasp, barely audible. "If you nod, Paisley, I won't rush this. I won't break anything." She did not nod. She simply rose up on her toes and pressed her mouth to his. It was not like the kiss on the pier, the one born of panic and adrenaline. This was a slow, deliberate decision. It was a deep, searching kiss that spoke of exhaustion, of shared danger, and of a profound, desperate need for a single safe moment. His breath mingled with hers, a shared lungful of the quiet room. His hands, the ones that had trembled after the pier, came up to her shoulders. They were infinitely gentle, his fingers spreading wide, holding her as if she were made of irreplaceable glass. Her own hands moved from his jaw, one linking behind his neck, the other pressing flat against the solid wall of his chest. He wore a light jacket over his shirt. As she pressed closer, he shrugged it off. It fell from his shoulders and pooled on the floor like a dark, folded sail, a surrender. He deepened the kiss, and it was she who guided them backward, a slow, stumbling retreat toward the long, low sofa. Every step was a question from him, a pause in his movement, a look in his eyes that asked, "Are you still here?" And every step she took was an answer, yes. She was the navigator. She was leading this. When they reached the sofa, she was the one who sat, pulling him down with her. She was the one who whispered the boundaries, the lines of respect he had already drawn. He honored them, his touch careful, his movements measured, proving his word. There, in the dark, with the city lights as their only witness, their shadows merged on the wall of bulletproof glass. It was a silent film playing 16 stories high. The image was one of complete trust, an intimacy conveyed not through frantic action, but through a slow, unfolding gentleness. It was two people, battered by the storm, finally lashing their ships together, finding a brief, safe harbor in each other. Later, they lay tangled on the sofa, the fallen jacket a makeshift blanket. The apartment was utterly silent. Paisley had her head on his chest, her ear pressed against his breastbone. She could hear the proof of him, his heart. It was no longer the frantic, trapped bird she had felt on the rooftop. It was hammering. Yes, a strong, fast rhythm from what had just passed. But as she listened, it began to slow. It settled, finding its resting pace, like a heavy anchor finally catching hold on the seabed. It was the calmest sound she had been able to hear in months. "I don't love you for your power," she whispered into the darkness, the confession so quiet she almost did not say it. He tensed, his hand stopping its slow stroke on her hair. "I don't," she said again, stronger. "I think I hate your power. I love the part of you that wants to let go of it, the part that wants to be clean, the part that's afraid of losing." She felt his chest expand on a deep, shaky breath. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she could not name. "Then I'll let that part win." He found her hand in the dark and laced his fingers through hers. And for one impossible, stolen hour, before the freight yard, before the ledgers, and before the final war, the navigator and the captain held hands and slept. The Blue Junction freight yard was a graveyard of rusting boxcars, lit by high sodium yellow lamps that cast everything in a diseased glow. The air was cold and still. They had just finished duplicating the ledger's contents onto a hard drive when the world lit up. Floodlights from 4 directions hit their car, pinning them in a cage of blinding white, the sound of sirens. Previously silent, erupted from all sides. Doors slammed, and the yard was instantly full of men in MOCB and CPD tactical vests. "This is an anonymous tip," Agent Shaw's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "We have the yard surrounded." It was Priska. It had to be. Casper didn't even flinch. As two agents smashed the passenger window, he looked at Paisley. "The tide," he said, low and urgent. Agents dragged him from the driver's side, forcing his hands behind his back, the plastic of zip-tie cuffs biting into his wrists. As they did, Paisley, shielded by the chaos, slipped the original Ledger Omega, the heavy black book, from her lap into the hidden, spring-locked compartment beneath her own seat, slamming it shut just as her door was ripped open. She was hauled out, her arms wrenched behind her. Casper was already on his knees, his face grim. One of the agents held up a phone. "Mr. Belandi, a call for you, and he says it's urgent." The agent put the phone on speaker. Arno Vescari's voice, slick with triumph, filled the cold air. "Casper, terrible luck you're having." There was a pause. "Hello, Paisley. Just so you know, the tip Priska gave them was about Casper. The tip I gave them was about you. Your little secret, that ledger. It's my bait now. You're all mine." Casper lunged, but the agents held him fast. By the time they reached the MOCB processing center downtown, the media was already a frenzy. A local news van, tipped off, caught their arrival. The morning headline was already written, "Belandi nabbed in midnight sting with notorious toy gun waitress." Hess, following protocol, had already moved jet. He was no longer at the Harbor Light. He was at Room Canary, a secondary, deep-level safe house, its location known only to her and Casper. Paisley was put in a cold, gray interview room. Agent Shaw entered, not with a file, but with a single piece of paper and a pen. She looked exhausted and angry. "Priska's in the wind," Shaw snapped, dropping the paper on the table. "And Vescari is playing games. But I know Casper has a master file. That black book his father kept. We know you were his last contact. I want it, Miss Lewis." "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me." Shaw slammed her hand on the table. "You are in this, deep. You're an accomplice to a racketeering enterprise. Your son is already in the system, flagged as the child of a ward of the state. You're going to lose him." The threat landed, cold and precise. "Sign this," Shaw said, pushing the paper forward. "It's an exchange agreement. You give us the real ledger, the one that ties Belandi to Vescari, and you walk. We'll even consider removing the flag on your son to protect the child." Paisley scanned the document. It offered her immunity in exchange for the ledger. It said nothing about the frame-up. It said nothing about Alderman Kelm. It said nothing about clearing Casper's name. It was a trap. "I want a lawyer," Paisley said, her voice flat. They were moving Casper down the hallway as she was being escorted to a holding cell. He was in handcuffs, flanked by 2 city cops. He stopped, looking at her. The cops shoved him. "Keep moving, Belandi." "It's a high tide tonight," Casper said, his voice loud enough for her to hear. He kept his eyes locked on hers. "A strong one. You know, the anchor never stops the tide, Paisley. It just has to hold long enough for the tide to catch all the trash and pull it back out to sea." "Shut up, Belandi." They shoved him around the corner. But Paisley had the message. Let the tide, the corrupt system, pull them all down. Expose them all. She was released 6 hours later. Insufficient evidence to hold, her public defender said, baffled. Shaw had let her go. She was the bait, just as Arno had said. Shaw wanted her to lead them to the ledger. Paisley walked out the precinct's front doors into a gray, hostile morning, her mind racing. She had to find the link. Priska and Kelm. She was so focused she almost missed it. A black, windowless SUV that had been parked across the street suddenly pulled out, its engine roaring, and swerved to block her path on the sidewalk. 2 men in tracksuits jumped out, Vescari's men. Paisley's hand dove into her purse. She didn't have a weapon. She had Jet's old toys. Her fingers closed around the plastic gun. The one from the Blue Lantern. The one Arno had painted black. On impulse, she had wrapped it in a roll of silver duct tape from a utility drawer, making it look like a bizarre, heavy, homemade weapon. She ripped it out, holding it two-handed, just as Casper had. "Get back!" she screamed, her voice breaking with pure adrenaline. "MOCB, drop your weapons. Drop them now." The two men froze. They hesitated, confused by the silver-wrapped object, her proximity to the police station, and the sheer, desperate certainty in her voice. That 1-second hesitation was all he needed. A battered blue sedan shot the gap between the SUV and the curb, its horn blaring. The passenger door flew open. "Get in now." Paisley. It was a man she vaguely recognized from the Cobalt Room, a sailor. She didn't ask. She dove into the car. The man gunned the engine, hopping the curb and speeding down a one-way street as the Vascari crew scrambled back to their SUV. "Who are you?" Paisley panted, clutching the toy gun. "Noah Brandt. I was first mate on the Adriatica," he said, weaving through traffic. "Mr. Belandi. He paid for my kid's surgery last year. He has a few of us on rotation. Watching you, watching his investment." "They let me go." Paisley said, "Shaw let me go. She's waiting for me to find the ledger. They're all working together. Then we find what they're protecting first," Noah said. "I know where Priska met Shaw," Paisley said, her mind clearing. "But I need to find where she met Kelm, the alderman." "Kelm?" Noah said, his knuckles white. "He owns half the warehouses on the South Branch. Where was the meet with Shaw?" "A garage near O'Hare. A public space," Noah said, thinking fast. "He wouldn't meet her there. He'd use his own property. Kelm Storage. It's a massive public storage warehouse off the canal. Perfect place to hide a server." "Let's go," Paisley said. As they sped south, Paisley pulled out her phone. She had one more card to play, one point of leverage. She found the contact Reese Halley, an independent investigative reporter who had been hounding the MOCB for years. She opened a new message, turned on her phone's live location sharing, and typed, "I have the Belandi master ledger. I'm being hunted by MOCB and Vascari. Here is my location. If I go silent for more than 1 hour, publish everything." She hit send. The public lever was pulled. "Okay, Noah," she said, pocketing the phone. "Let's go catch the tide." Kelm Storage was not just a warehouse. It was a fortress of concrete and steel, smelling of dust and cold river water. Noah jimmied a side door, and they slipped into the cavernous darkness, their footsteps echoing. High above, on a mezzanine level, they heard voices. Priska Vale and Arno Vascari. They were working frantically, unplugging a small, black mini server from a rack. Paisley saw her opening. On the wall by the loading bay was a master control panel. She flicked a switch, and the entire warehouse PA system crackled to life with a deafening pop. She had memorized the key phrase from the ledger. She grabbed the microphone. "Testing," she said, her voice booming, distorted, and inhumanly loud. "Attention, transfer authorization, Fund 44B, Alderman Thomas Kelm, Source Vascari Holdings, Pier 9, amount." She read off a number from the hard drive's file list. Authorization code Priska Vale. Repeat. Transfer to Kelm. "What is that?" Priska's voice shrieked from above. Arno stepped to the railing, his face a mask of fury. He saw them. "You!" he roared. He pulled out his phone. Not a gun. "You think you're clever. You stupid woman, you want to play look." He held the phone up. The screen showed a live feed. It was Jet, sitting in a nondescript room, reading a book with Hess. It was a long-distance shot, clearly from a hidden camera. "One call, Paisley," Arno snarled. "One call, and that room is compromised. You shut your mouth, or he's gone." Paisley's blood ran cold, but the navigator took the wheel. She kept her voice steady, icy, and loud over the PA. "You're bluffing, Arno. That's a replay loop. I know where he is." She was projecting, guessing, but the words felt true. "Jet is in room Canary, sublevel. The doors are on a 90-minute coded rotation. You can't get in. You lost." Arno's face contorted. He knew she was right. The threat was empty. He dropped the phone and raised his firearm. "Kill them!" A gunshot exploded from the mezzanine. Noah shoved Paisley behind a stack of pallets. "I'll hold the door," he yelled, drawing his own weapon and returning fire, keeping the two gunmen with Arno pinned. Arno and Priska were scrambling, grabbing the server and the briefcase. Priska fumbled, pulling a small pistol from her purse. "I need a distraction," Paisley yelled to Noah. She reached into her purse and her fingers found the tape-wrapped toy. She jammed a tiny, shrieking personal alarm into the handle earlier. She twisted the base. A piercing electronic siren, loud as a smoke detector, erupted from the toy. A series of tiny LED lights on its side began to flash a blinding, erratic red and blue. "Police!" Paisley screamed and hurled it, underhand, onto the metal mezzanine. The object skittered across the walkway, a shrieking, flashing, silver and black thing that looked like a bizarre explosive. Arno, conditioned for tactical threats, did exactly what she hoped. He reacted to the object, ducking low, twisting away from the confusing stimulus. It exposed his entire right side. Priska, panicked by the noise, turned toward it, her gun wavering. Paisley didn't wait. She bolted up the metal stairs, not at Arno, but at Priska. As Priska turned back, Paisley grabbed her wrist, not her hand. She drove her thumb into the nerve bundle on the forearm, a move Hess had drilled into her. "The disarm." Priska screamed, her fingers spasming open. The gun clattered to the floor. "Paisley, down." She looked up. Arno had recovered and was leveling his gun, a heavy, metal shipping shield, the kind dock workers use, slammed into Arno, sending him flying. Casper Belandi stood there, his face grim, his other hand empty. "My lawyer found a procedural error in the warrant," he panted, kicking the gun away from Arno. Just as he spoke, the main loading doors of the warehouse screeched open. Agent Tilda Shaw stood there, flanked by MOCB agents, her face a mask of triumph. "It's over! Everyone hands in the air! You are all under arrest!" "Shaw," a new voice yelled. A woman, Reese Halley, was standing on the loading dock, a cameraman beside her. The camera's red light was on. She was live streaming. "Agent Shaw," Reese called out, her voice amplified by her own mic. "We are live. Can you comment on this footage?" She turned a laptop toward Shaw. It was playing the video from the parking garage. Shaw and Priska. The audio was clear. "We swapped the head. We cut the tail." Shaw's face went white. "And for our viewers just joining," Reese continued, her voice cutting, "we are also streaming the complete, unencrypted contents of the Belandi Ledger Omega, which was just secured from Paisley Lewis's car, the one your agents are currently trying to illegally search." The tide had just hit the beach. Alderman Kelm, who had been hiding in the office below the mezzanine, made a break for a side exit. Casper saw him. He didn't raise his borrowed shield. He didn't pick up Arno's gun. He walked into the center of the warehouse floor, into the glare of Shaw's floodlights and Reese Halley's news camera. He raised his empty hands. "I'm not running," Casper said, his voice ringing with authority. "I will testify about all of it. The money laundering was Priska Vale's, under his direction." He pointed at the fleeing alderman. "He used Arno Viscari for retaliation. It ends now." Arno, seeing the entire world collapse, scrambled to his feet. He wasn't reaching for a gun. He was holding a small black detonator. In his other hand, he grabbed the briefcase Priska had been holding. "If I go down, we all go down," he screamed, his thumb on the red button. Paisley didn't hesitate. She jumped into the seat of a nearby electric forklift. The keys were in it. She jammed the accelerator. The machine whined and shot forward. Arno fumbled with the briefcase, trying to arm it. Paisley slammed the forks directly into the case, pinning it and Arno's hand against a concrete support pillar. The signal was blocked, his thumb uselessly mashing the button. The warehouse alarms, triggered by the chaos, blared to life. A deep, pulsing whoop, whoop, whoop filled the air, and flashing red emergency lights bathed every face in blood, cornered, trapped, and defeated. Priska Vale crumpled to the ground, sobbing. "He made me," she wailed, pointing at Kelm. "Kelm, he promised me a way out. A way to escape the blood ledgers. To be clean, I'll tell you everything. I have the master decryption key here. Take it." She threw a thumb drive at the floor. "Agent Shaw, frozen, stared at her own image on Reese's laptop. Agent Shaw, a new, cold voice said, 2 men in dark suits, internal affairs, stepped out of the crowd. You're suspended. Pending investigation. Hand over your badge and weapon. As they escorted a stunned Shaw away, a new figure, an older, grim-faced man, took her place. He looked at the scene. He looked at Arno, pinned by the forklift. He looked at Kelm, frozen in his escape. He looked at Casper, standing with his hands up. I am Deputy Chief Miller, MOCB, he announced. Get Alderman Kelm in cuffs. Get Viscari in cuffs. And Mr. Belandi. You have the right to remain silent, but I'd strongly suggest you accept our offer of voluntary, cooperative testimony. 3 months later, the Chicago winter had finally broken, replaced by a tentative green spring. The name Belandi, once whispered in connection with shadows on the docks, was now printed in clean, sans serif font on the side of new container trucks. Belandi Freight Works was official, legitimized, and operating under a strict transparency charter signed voluntarily with the new City Oversight Committee. As part of Casper's extensive testimony, the dark, inherited parts of the syndicate, the protection rackets, the loan sharking had been surgically exposed and dissolved under federal supervision. Paisley Lewis no longer wore a hostess's black dress. She now wore a high-visibility vest and a hard hat. Casper had not given her a token job. He had given her a critical one. She was the new port safety coordinator. Her observant eyes, the ones that had once tracked suspicious patrons and exit routes, now scanned for hairline fractures and crane supports, unsafe stacking procedures, and labor violations. She spent her days walking the piers, interviewing the longshoremen, and writing a new employee handbook she'd titled The Anchor Strong Dock, a Manual for Staying Safe. She was, in her own way, still navigating, protecting people from the dangers they could not see. The Harbor Light apartment was gone, replaced by a quiet house in Edgewater, her old neighborhood, one Saturday afternoon. She watched from the kitchen as Casper sat with Jet on their small dock overlooking the calm lake. Jet had a book, but he was looking at the water. Do you still hate the water, Mr. Casper? Jet asked, his 7-year-old voice carrying clearly. Paisley paused, listening. Casper was silent for a moment. Yes, he said, every day. Me too, sometimes, Jet admitted. I'll tell you what someone taught me, Casper said, his voice rough. You do not have to like it. You just have to respect it, and you have to teach your lungs that you are in charge, not the water. He motioned. Breathe with me. In for 4. Hold. Out for 6. Paisley watched the man who had commanded an empire and the small boy who had saved him sit side by side, practicing their breathing, facing the vast, shimmering thing they both feared. The fear did not disappear. It just became smaller, shared. The court cases were swift and brutal. With Casper's testimony, Priska's decryption keys, and the Ledger Omega, Alderman Kelm and Arno Viscari were found guilty. The sentences were long. Priska Vale, for her full cooperation, received a drastically reduced sentence for conspiracy and fraud. The MOCB, gutted by the internal affairs investigation, was rebuilt from the ground up. Agent Shaw was gone. The new charter explicitly forbade off-book contacts with confidential informants, ending the era of shadow deals. The Blue Lantern Supper Club, scrubbed clean of its notoriety, eventually reopened. The owner sent Paisley an invitation and a profound, written apology. She went on a Tuesday night. The same jazz trio was playing, but the song was different, lighter. They called it New Morning. Before she left, Paisley took the silver-taped, black-painted plastic toy from her purse. She placed it in the glass charity box by the door. She'd left a small, laminated card attached to it. It read, "This toy saved a life. Do not let real guns take them." Casper's public rehabilitation was harder. He did not hide. He faced it. In a press conference announcing the finalization of Freight Works, he did something no Belandi had ever done. He apologized, not for the crimes of his father, but for his own. "My actions," he said, his voice steady. "My choices in a world I was trying to leave, put innocent people in the storm, specifically Miss Paisley Lewis and her son. He announced that 20% of his personal shares in the new company would be placed in a permanent trust, funding the Caroline Lewis Nursing Scholarship at Northwestern, named for Paisley's mother, for single parents returning to school. That evening, Paisley met him on the docks. Long after the crews had gone home, the sun was setting, bleeding orange and purple into the industrial water. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of summer. They did not speak for a long time. He just opened his arms, and she stepped into them, laying her head on his chest. He held her, his arms wrapped securely around her waist. There was no desperation, no fear, just presence. She splayed her hand over his heart, feeling its steady, calm, resting rhythm, a rhythm she had come to know as his and as hers. The promises were not grand. There were no illusions of a perfect, easy life. "It is going to be hard," he murmured into her hair. "The name will always be there. The past will always be close." "I know," she said, her voice muffled by his shirt. She tilted her head back. "But we are here, today." He looked down at her, his steel eyes softened by the dusk. "Tomorrow," he said, a quiet vow. "We choose each other again." He leaned down, and the kiss was slow and sure and tasted only of promise. Life found its new shape on weekends. Paisley started a free self-defense class at the Edgewater Community Hub. She taught the disarm Hess had taught her, the awareness she had learned at the Cobalt Room, and the confidence she had earned at the Freight Yard. She taught other single parents how to be their own navigators. And sometimes, Casper Belandi would be there, not participating, just standing by the exit, leaning against the wall, watching her with a quiet, protective smile, a lighthouse keeper, guarding his light. On the dock, Jet finished his book. He folded a piece of paper, a page from his drawing pad. He meticulously shaped it into a boat with a red crayon. He drew a single, small anchor on its side. He leaned over, placing the boat gently on the water's surface. He gave it a small push. It was not a retreat. It was not running away. It was a launch. The small paper vessel caught the current, moving steadily away from the shore, heading toward the open, brighter water. Paisley came out to stand beside Casper, watching the boat bob in the distance. The summer air of the city settled around them. "Our story," she said quietly, thinking of the ledgers, the lies, and the violence. "It is not perfectly clean." Casper slid his hand into hers, his fingers lacing through hers. "No," he agreed, his eyes on the horizon. "But it is honest, and honest is the only way to make sure the storm does not come back." Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe to Mafia Boss Stories, like this video, and give it a little extra support by hitting that hype button to help this story be heard by more people.